Hello, I'm Dr. Anil Gudi, and today I'm going to talk to you about one of the subjects which we are often asked and which is often debated very hotly. So, what happens when you have only one embryo? Now, do you replace the embryo on day three or do you culture till day five? And there is a huge debate, and that debate never ends. There are those who say, what if the embryo doesn't reach day five? Are we certain that the laboratory conditions are good enough that an embryo that does not reach day 5 in a laboratory would never do that in utero? It's a difficult question to answer. The second thing is, do we say, let's put in a day 3 embryo, and if it doesn't work, we will assume that it has not reached the blastocyst stage? And I don't think on this case we have a right answer. So let's have a look at the study. And what this study looked at was it was a retrospective study, so there are limitations to how this study is looked at. And they looked at a day 3 embryo transfer versus a day 5 embryo transfer. So what do you do? And that's a very simple statement which was asked, and they looked at it from a retrospective analysis. So let's look at this. In patients where only one embryo is there on day 3, do you replace it? Does transferring the embryo into the uterine environment achieve a higher pregnancy rates? Or is it better to grow to day 4 or day 5? So if you look at the design of the study, it is a retrospective cohort study with only one single viable embryo on day 3, 1,384 women. When data was extracted, embryos were transferred on day 3 or embryos were transferred on day 4 to day 6. And they looked at the age, BMI, all these were in line. Now, at present, as you realize that across the world, there is a general shift towards a day 5 embryo. There are additional characteristics, and in fact, you can grade the embryo much better because there are more cells. You can also freeze embryos, and these embryos survive much better. It is postulated that the blastocyst has an ability to synchronize better with the endometrium. And also, there is an option that you can choose from a large number of embryos that are present. So what should we do when only one embryo is present? So they looked at this study, and if you have a look at the two groups, and in those in which a day 3 transfer was done, about 9% were discarded, but 90% of women had an embryo transfer done. On the other hand, when you looked at the day 5 embryo transfers, almost a third of patients did not have an embryo transfer, and 65% had an embryo transfer. So if you look at the live birth rate on the basis of the amount of embryos which were planned for treatment, you will see that on day 3, the live birth rate was 9.7%, while on day 4 to day 6, it was 4.4%. And you'll say they are very low, but think about it. As soon as you get a single embryo, your live birth rate starts mirroring nature. Now, why would it be that you have just taken a single embryo and that would give you a huge chance of success? The answer is no. You're very likely, when you're aiming towards getting back one egg or one embryo, you're then looking at success rates which are significantly lower. Now, what is the discussion here? The discussion here is that the poor responders, those who produce one egg or one embryo, may benefit from a day 3 transfer. I'm not saying that it is the best of using the embryology technique, but what you're doing is you're aiming to at least replace an embryo in someone in whom the chances of pregnancy are low. In poor responders, there is some evidence of poor metabolism, of DNA damage, and which leads to cleavage arrest. And there are a significant number of poor responders where embryos may not cross day 3. Again, will morphokinetics help us to make this selection? And we don't know that. Those days are still early. And eventually, we'll have to look at these results and they'll have to be evaluated in bigger studies. So, what does this study suggest? It suggests that when only one embryo is available, then transferring on day 3 would lead to a higher rate of live birth rate than transferring an embryo on day 4 to day 6. That's again based on a very simple logic that if you don't transfer any embryos, you won't have any pregnancy. So in those cases in which you have just one embryo remaining, you will, if you go ahead with a blastocyst culture, there will be a certain significant proportion of patients who will not have a transfer. And if you plan to do it, it's better to have a very fair and frank discussion to say, that's my standard of my laboratory, where I will culture to a blastocyst. And if it doesn't reach a blastocyst, it's very unlikely that it will implant. Well, in other cases, where you just have one embryo, then it makes sense to try and replace it on day 3. But if you have more embryos, then I think it is wrong to take that step of replacing on day 3. Or rather, if your laboratory is up to the standard, you push the embryos and get it to day 5. Thank you very much, and thank you for watching.